Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Joining us now is our friend Dr. John Gartner, psychologist, co-founder of Duty to Warn, which is mental health professionals warning about Trump. And he also co-hosts a podcast, Shrinking Trump, on the Really American Network with Dr. Harry Siegel. Dr. Gartner, nice to see you. You're my favorite doctor because there's no copay or deductible. I'm really a single person. So like, Dr. Gartner's here. This is not going to cost me. I like this. And it's nice to see you. Thank you for making time. You were on to remind people last month, and I said, we'll see you probably near the end of the year. But this really is an emergency house call you're making because of some things that happened over the last. So thanks for being on.
Well, the one prediction that I keep making that I can't lose. I'm telling you, if I were in Vegas, I couldn't. This is like a bet you can't lose. Every time you have me on the show, Dean, Trump is going to be worse than the last time you had me on the show. Okay, yep. Because that's the nature of dementia. That's the name of organic cognitive decline. It's a rock rolling downhill, and it only goes in one direction, and it doesn't stay still. So I've had this line that I've been using, and I know I've used it on your show. I say, take a good look at Donald Trump today, because that's the best Donald Trump you're ever going to see. I can't go wrong with that prediction. Is my point.
You're and I've quoted you on the show and even in my Substack articles with that very line. And that makes all the sense in the world because sadly, have not figured out a way to get better, to reverse cognitive decline or if it's dementia and Alzheimer's, whatever it is. And sadly, one day we might, or at least to stop it completely, but you don't. So we have this, I'm going to ask you about specific things, but overarching, and it's about 3 weeks ago you were on, any things that you want to touch on, and we'll go a little deeper into it though, that jumped out, that was
Sure.
a red flag for you.
Well, I think the speech at Quantico was kind of a 3-alarm fire. It caught a lot of people's attention. Mm-hmm. Here's one dependent variable. After the speech at Quantico, I got a lot more phone calls from people like your producer.
Like, get me Dr. Gartner stat. That's what I said.
Exactly. Like all of a sudden, right. It was this emergency call to the doctor. There was only one doctor to call. But it really, I think it was a wake-up call. And I think that, for example, Madeleine Dean, I'm sure you saw that piece of tape where she confronted Mike Johnson and said, look, the president is not well. The president is not well. And what's interesting is what Johnson said is, well, a lot of people on your side aren't well either. He didn't deny it. He didn't say the president's fine. He just said, they love to do that whataboutism. Well, I don't really care if there are some Democrats with dementia. They're not president. That's a pretty weak defense.
I agree.
But they're starting to say it.
And you know what? If it wasn't for the jarring lines that Trump said that really jumped out for people from the Quantico speech was about the enemy within and asking the military to help him, and we're going to train, and no one applauding, and I'm looking uncomfortable. If it wasn't for those lines, I think the headline could have been, it was not the Trump we've seen before in terms of his delivery. And again, it was a very, very low energy, like very much like leaning in and almost whispering. And I'm like, this is not normal at all. And I really wish I really wish you didn't say those other lines, because everyone in the country would have asked the question, what's going on? So what did you, and he did the thing about like Obama, I don't like him, except he went down steps quickly. And I'm like, this is like a conversation with my mom when she had dementia. These are just bizarre things. So what did you take away from the energy level? Because again, I know people who listen to the show don't want to watch him. Watch for this. It's not the Trump we've seen just a few months ago, let alone a few years ago. Different guy.
Well, with dementia comes a decrease in energy and also sometimes dramatic, unpredictable drops in energy. For example, the guy slept most days through his criminal trial. I realize that's not that recent, but I'm saying that was an alarm bell. Okay. I spoke to a bunch of lawyers, and I know you used to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And not one of them could remember in their entire career a defendant falling asleep at the witness table. They just couldn't remember it ever happening. I'm not saying it's never happened in the history of the world. I'm sure it does. But probably if someone's on drugs, maybe they might pass out. Not only did he fall asleep at the witness table, but a witness table where literally he knows the whole world is watching. And he didn't just fall asleep once. He fell asleep most days. Okay, that's not normal. Okay, he fell asleep at the Pope's funeral. He falls asleep. He fell asleep at the finals of the U.S. Open while he was being cheered and jeered by the crowd. So this is really, I mean, it relates to the low energy, right? There's low energy, and then there's just losing energy altogether. But this is a physical manifestation of the dementia, because dementia doesn't just affect your thinking; it affects your physical functioning, your psychomotor performance. We've talked about his wide-based gait,
Yep.
that a lot of experts think is pathognomonic of frontotemporal dementia. There was also, by the way, that thing where we feel he may have had a mini stroke, where half of his face was drooped down for a while, and that's not a sign of fatigue or aging, or I mean, that's a pretty hard sign of something going wrong when one part of your body is drooping. But I agree with you. You know, the thing about Trump is he's a malignant narcissist who is
Right.
a dictator, right? So, of course, he does want to say there's an enemy within and send the troops in. We knew that was his plan from the get-go. But because he's deteriorating mentally, right, the speech, in addition to being low energy, as you say, it meandered through all of these bizarre permutations. Now, I actually typed out one of them. I have to switch
Okay.
glasses for this because I'm going to
Sure.
read it to you. Okay. So, this is what he said. When I have a general and I have to sign for a general, because we have beautiful paper, gorgeous paper, I said, put a little more gold on it. They deserve it. I want the A paper, not the D paper we used to sign that piece of garbage. I said, this guy's going to be a general, right? All right, I want to use the big, beautiful, firm paper. I want to use the real gold writing. After all the work you do to become a general or admiral, your commission, that commission is beautifully displayed, and I sign it. I actually love my signature. Everybody loves my signature, but I sign it very proudly, and I think to myself, how can you have an auto pen sign this? So disrespectful. To me, it's totally disrespectful. As it turns out, almost everything he did was auto pen, except when he gave his son Hunter a pardon, he signed that one. Actually, it's the worst signature I've ever seen. The auto pen looks better. Now, what I want to point out about this is all of this
That
is
was a great
completely
reading. That was a great. You should do off Broadway. Dr. John Gartner reads Donald Trump. Reading Trump, we'll call it.
well,
I know it's
Harry
very good.
comments on that. Harry comments on that because he says John doesn't do an impression of Trump; he channels Trump.
You do you, but so tell us what, because a few things jumped out as you were reading that to me based on our past conversations. So what did you hear and see from that
Okay, so
passage?
several things. So first of all, one of the things that happens when people get dementia, and I know you'll recognize this, is they might latch on to a very immaterial detail and in a concrete way, and then start free associating to that thing. He did it before with grass. I think we have talked about that, where he's talking about, oh, we're redoing the parks, and I know grass, and you got to get the best grass, and there's some grass is no good, but this grass is not. And it went on for talking 15 minutes about grass. Here, he's talking about paper and what kind of paper, and he has beautiful paper, and Biden had terrible paper, and he has gold in it, and it's all he's following a chain of associations through his mind that have nothing to do with the topic at hand. So, and the other thing is, because he's a malignant narcissist, right? He always has to be bragging, but because his mind is deteriorating and he's focusing on these irrelevant details, he goes, and I have a wonderful signature. Everybody loves my signature. Oh, that other guy, he was a jerk. He had a lousy signature. I mean, he's not talking about his signature legislation. He's talking about his
Right.
actual signature.
I can, when you were reading it, you can actually hear where the new thought comes in, and then he goes to that place, and then the new word triggers a whole nother
Exactly.
thought, and you can't stay on
Exactly.
the path. And I wonder if you asked him about it afterwards, would he remember that? I don't know. I wonder if he would remember why did you talk about the auto pen and Biden's signature? And I wonder if he would even recall that he talked about it. I mean, is there something that you see with people who have cognitive decline? Do they lose short-term memory? Is there issues there?
Well, yes, and he may not remember it, and he's showing an inability to remember things. At one point, he was saying, "Well, so and so, I forget it was, if he was here, he would tell," and he was actually in the room. It was someone on his staff who was standing right behind him. I forget which moment that was. And then at one point, he was talking about how he talked to some Democrat, maybe
Hakeem
Hakeem
Jeffries.
Jeffries. Right.
He couldn't
And with some
remember.
other guy. He was with some
Right.
other guy, and he couldn't remember who the other guy was. Well, it was another one of the legislators that he deals with on a regular basis. So we were seeing those gaps in memory.
And to that very point about Hakeem Jeffries, Donald Trump said, and it's weird because people read things into Trump because he's such a bad person as a human being. And they're saying, oh, he was being respectful about Hakeem Jeffries, but I want to read the thing. He goes, I had this chat with Chuck Schumer. He was there yesterday with, and he goes, the very nice gentleman. I don't really know him. You know who I'm talking about. The two of them came in, and he
Oh, it was
wasn't
Hakeem
being
Jeffries.
funny.
That's who
He
he was
was
talking
not
about.
right.
Mhm.
He was not being mean. He was not being strident. The people around him didn't laugh. They didn't get the sense that he was being
No.
disrespectful, because he actually used the term. He's a very nice gentleman. He didn't say sarcastically. He couldn't remember the name of the Democratic minority leader who he had just
Right.
met with. And again, if Biden had done that, the insanity of what we're seeing. But this is, again, is this not consistent in your view with just more degradation on a daily basis?
It is. It absolutely is. And also, these nuances are important. I'm getting older. I sometimes have trouble grasping people's names. Sometimes even on the show. Fortunately, we edit our show. But I mean, sometimes like, the guy from Michigan, the Michigan, and then
Right.
Harry will tell me who it is. But I know that I'm struggling for the name. I know that I just can't pull out the name. If he had said, Schumer and who I mean, the minority leader guy,
Right.
fine. I'm not going to criticize him for having trouble having a tip of the tongue phenomenon where he just can't grab the name. But he also acted as if he didn't know who this person was. Not just that he didn't
Right.
know who the name was. He said he came with this very nice gentleman. Well, he's met with this person dozens of times. He's interacted with him dozens of times. He's seen him on TV dozens of times. So he knows who he is, and he's acting like he doesn't even know who he is. It reminds me when I was a college student, the way I got into graduate school, I did research on Korsakoff patients. And I would walk in, and they have alcohol destroys their ability to store new long-term memories. I'm not saying Trump has that, but it's a memory problem. And you would come to the ward of the VA, and you would meet them for the fifth time and say, "Oh, pleased to meet you, doctor." And at that point I wasn't a doctor, and I kept reminding him I'm just a college student, and we've met
Right.
5 times before. It sort of reminded me of that kind of a moment, right? A total lack of recognition, right? That this is someone he has engaged with before.
Right. And that's such an important point you're making, because some people did call and say he was being dismissive because Hakeem's a black guy and all that stuff. That was not the syntax of it. He said, I didn't really know him. And Hakeem Jeffries is from New York, where Trump used to live. He's a member of Congress in Brooklyn. Like, he's a staple of New York politics. Donald Trump knows him. He's mocked him. He's talked to him. He couldn't remember who he is. And it reminds me when my mom, the woman who lived with her, who was a home health aide, she would forget her name, and she'd go, sometimes it got really extreme. She was like, what's that lady? I go, Mom, she lives here. And she'd get that. But other times she goes, the lady, the lady who lives here, that kind of stuff. Like, at least she knew it was lady, but sometimes she didn't know who she was, which was a weird thing. Every now and then later in life, that gets really jarring and scary for everyone when those things happen. It was much more like that with Donald Trump. He had no idea who Hakeem Jeffries was. But it gets to the fact that you're covering it. Corporate media, every now and then a few pundits will say it, but it's not in the teleprompter. The anchors are not doing it. They don't have a whole panel on it. I've talked to anchors at other networks about you, TV networks, saying you should have you on, specifically your name. And the look on their face is like, it's not that they don't want to, like, it's beyond. They're like, yeah, maybe one day, like, they want to have you on. They know it'll be great TV. They can't. The executives don't want it.
I say their bosses won't let them. Their bosses won't let them. I've had
That's
this experience, I've had, lots of conversations with producers that, who then ghost me because the person above them said, are you crazy? We're not doing that. You want to get sued? Do we have to pay $1 billion to the Trump administration? Forget it. Don't put this guy on. It's, it's unfunny. But really think about this, Dean. Your analogy is you're remembering your mother's level of functioning when she was so ill and so deteriorated that she needed a live-in home health aide.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're saying is the level of functioning our president has gotten to.
Well, Trump has Stephen Miller living with him. That's Stephen Miller's Trump's home health aide. That's where we're at this point. Chatting with DrJohn Gartner, who would be the scariest and worst home health aide ever.
Like having Goebbels as your home health aide.
Yes. He's not rooting for you. He's rooting against you every day. It would be like, so another thing happened. Trump disappeared for a few days last week in the middle of the shutdown, to the point where Hakeem Jeffries, the guy Trump couldn't remember, said he remained in presidential witness protection program. And they asked Carolyn Levitt. He said he's working nonstop. So we didn't see him for days. There was one moment on Friday night, JD Vance released a picture of him at dinner with their family, like it was a proof of life photo. There was no questions being asked. It literally was, it felt like proof of life. Like, he's here, he's alive. And then he comes to this speech yesterday where he's late for it. And then his energy is like way over the top for the Navy people. And can you make sense for us, like how that could be consistent with someone who is declining at these moments of great
Sure.
energy and clarity?
Sure. Well, I'm sure you have this experience as well. You know, it's a cliche to say they have good days and bad days.
Right.
And, you know, even good times of the day and bad times of the day. It's very variable, right? The general curve is sloping downward, but it's sort of a downward sine curve. It goes up and down and up and down, but the average is angling down. He had a good day, or he had a good speech, or they pumped him up with Adderall, or what have you, you know, to get him through it, to power through it. But I think that what is happening now, sadly, is what was also happening with Biden, which is with Biden, you know, and I have to own this, right? I really got the call with Biden wrong, you know, because
Mhm.
I thought that they were exaggerating his cognitive decline for political reasons. They certainly weren't covering Trump's cognitive decline, which is far worse, at the same level.
Mhm.
So there was something to that criticism. But one of the reasons that we missed what was going on with Biden is they hid Biden. You know, they hid him in the White House. So, you know, the one thing that is a fair criticism about diagnosing from a distance is you don't know what you don't know. If you don't see the behavior, you can't evaluate the behavior. If you see the behavior, you can evaluate the behavior. I think they're doing a little bit of that shell game with Trump. I think some days when he's having bad days, they kind of hide him. You know, I do think there may have been some kind of mini stroke that he had when that hit, part of his face was drooping down.
It's very
Um,
weird.
it was very weird. And the thing about that face drooping is that, you know, it's not like when you get tired, half of your face droops, or when you get old, or half of your face. That's not an aging or a fatigue thing. It's kind of very specific to some kind of neurological incident, usually a stroke or mini stroke, that affects one side of the body. So one side is drooping and the other side isn't. And it could be Bell's palsy, but
Mhm.
it could be a lot of different things, but it's not normal. It suggests that we know things are going on. His cankles, the patches on his back of his hand. He's clearly not in good physical health, and they're clearly lying about it and clearly covering it up.
I mean, we saw the image with his face drooping. Then I haven't seen that symptom since. Can it
No.
resolve that quickly? Like if it was a
Well,
mini stroke?
you know, these mini strokes are kind of a little bit mysterious. You know, they can happen at random times. They can be very subtle. People can kind of recover a little bit from them. So I suspect that there may be more than one thing going on with him now physically, that he has so many circulatory problems in
Mhm.
addition to the dementia, and that they may be contributing to each other. Or if it's frontotemporal dementia, the worse his circulation gets, the more that's going to affect his dementia. So we really have a lot of different factors going on, but there's so much variability that you're right. What the press is doing is they're kind of editing out the crazy, right? And they're giving us, you know, the 5 minutes of coherent speech, you know, even if they have to patch them all together with some weird jump cuts.
Right. The is there a test, objectively speaking, that one would give to someone like Donald Trump when you have these concerning
Course,
symptoms?
of
What is it
course.
called? I don't know any of the names of these
Well,
tests.
I mean, I'm not a neuropsychologist, but there's a whole battery of tests we give in these. We don't just give one test. You know, when
Okay.
we think someone is showing these kinds of deficits, it's like an all-day testing. You
Oh.
know, yeah. I mean, we test them. I mean, we certainly take brain scans and do a physical exam, but there's also a neuropsychologist, mostly paper and pencil tests, but he'll take him, you know, hours and hours to go through all, because we're measuring each mental function, right?
Mhm.
Memory, logic, all kinds of things. So, you know, I've said this for years, but if Donald Trump were your mother or your uncle, you would run, not walk, to the neurologist for a full battery workup. They're basically actually, Donald Trump is getting the worst medical care on planet Earth because anyone else would be under intensive, care right now.
What does a brain scan show in terms of aging in the brain?
Well, I'm not sure about aging, but when there's
Oh,
deterioration with
yeah,
dementia,
deteriorate. That's what I meant.
yeah,
More like
yeah, parts of the brain actually die. You know, so we can see, you know, gaps in the brain where there's, you know, holes or there's dead tissue. We can see
ah.
it on a PET scan. It would, so if anyone was actually evaluating, if anyone cared about his well-being and was actually doing proper medical treatment, they would definitely give him a brain scan.
So the brain scan, objectively speaking, can show, and it's not invasive. It's a normal thing, like you get an MRI scan, I assume, or a CAT scan,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and that's something that what I'm getting at. For us to say this stuff, we want to. He has this or that. It would be better if Democrats could articulate the type of test that they would want to see from Donald Trump, because maybe the media then would latch on. If Democrats say, "Look, we
Hmm.
know there's something wrong with Trump," and if he would get a brain scan, simple as that, it's not invasive, it's not painful, then his doctors can tell us what they
Good
find.
idea.
Is that fair to say, though?
I think it's a great idea, Dean. I really do. I mean, I think make the ask more specific. Instead of Dean Phillips, Madeline Phillips saying, Madeline Dean, sorry, saying, he's not well. I should say, we need to see the brain scan. Release the Epstein files and the brain scan.
That's good. I'm gonna write that down. Release the Epstein files in the brain scan. No, because I'm really look. I despise Donald Trump. Everyone knows that. That's not a big deal. I think it's a threat to our all that. But for the good of our nation, we need to know who's running this nation, right? I don't
Yeah.
want Stephen Miller to be running the nation. I'm sure he has a big influence. I don't want JD Vance running the nation. Donald Trump is president, and if he's not competent, then they should invoke the 25th Amendment. JD Vance is president, and we deal with it as for people who are Democrats like myself.
Yeah.
That
Sure.
we deal with that. But
Sure.
having a person who is being led around. Because look what he said yesterday at the Navy speech. He said he bragged that he's the best specimen ever. And what did he cite? Not a recent test, but Ronnie Jackson from 2018. And he doesn't have, and that was his doctor then. Ronnie Jackson's in Congress now, had his own struggles. But the point is, he doesn't, I don't know if there's a cutoff to making some of their newer memories about certain issues or not. Because new doctors today are not signing things like that. Because I don't know if, like a lawyer, if I would lie about certain things, I would get in trouble. I could lose my law license. I don't see doctors making statements like he's the best specimen in the world. That was a Ronnie Jackson thing. And again, from 2018, and he repeated it yesterday.
Well, Ronnie Jackson is a complete and utter liar. I think Ronnie Jackson is a psychopath. But actually, to be fair, that is actually a requirement to work for the Trump administration to be a psychopath. If you're not, you're not qualified. And so, not only did he lie about Trump's health, but it was so outrageous that he's an incredible specimen. He's got incredible genes. He could live to be 1,000. And recently he said that Donald Trump is more mentally sharp now than he's ever been. I mean, it's laughable, right? I mean, everyone who's worked with Trump or observed Trump knows he's lost more than a few steps since the last time he was president. But the whole mocha thing that he keeps bragging about, it's really insane. First of all, by the way, there's a history to his taking the mocha. I just get a little bit of a victory lap. I was working with Tom Steyer for a year, and we had this whole publicity campaign demanding that Ronnie Jackson give him a cognitive screening. I couldn't have done it on my own, but they had this huge publicity machine. They pumped it out to tens of thousands of journalists, and it seemed to work because then Trump said, "Yeah, well, give me the test. I got to answer those critics." So we created the situation where he felt he had to answer the critics, and they gave him the test. I don't think they gave him the test this time, but people should understand the mocha is really a screening device for pretty serious dementia. So if you fail the mocha, that means you probably can't actually function independently. And it's a real tripwire for now we need to do a very serious evaluation. So passing the mocha does not mean that you don't have dementia. It means it just hasn't deteriorated to a great degree. It certainly doesn't mean that you're super intelligent. It's like the questions are like, draw a clock. Which of these animals is a lion? Anyone who can pass kindergarten in good standing can pass the mocha.
Well,
Okay.
to me, I want to go to objective indicators, and brain scan sounds like the right thing to lean into, to be honest with you. I'm going to write an article about
like it.
you on this. So
I
last
like
thing,
it.
you had a really good post on social media about Trump's single greatest fear. Same for every malignant narcissist. It's not just losing, not just accountability, it's humiliation. And you're getting at this explains his fixation on the Epstein files and the frantic flailing behavior to distract and deflect from them. I never really put that together. What can you share about that?
Well, actually, I think it also explains his obsession with the mocha to bring it back to the conversation we've been having. I mean, if I took a screening test 10 years ago, right, for some disease that I don't have, I would say I wouldn't repeatedly be talking about it for a decade. And I passed that screening. I passed it. Not only did I pass it, but the doctors couldn't believe it. They'd never seen anyone pass it with that high a score, which actually 30 out of 30 is a perfect score, which is what you expect if you're not demented. There's no 31. It can't go above 30.
Right.
So
Like a Spinal
there's no
Tap thing.
way
You
that
can't go to
anybody could
11.
be impressed with his score. It's just impossible. But he keeps repeating that lie over and over again. Why? No one else is even bringing it up in 99% of these contexts. He knows that he's cognitively not intact. He knows he's deteriorating. And that's such a humiliating idea. He needs to ward it off by bragging about, how he's an eighth wonder of the world because no one's ever passed the MoCA with such a great score and the doctors couldn't believe it. And he keeps bringing it up. He keeps bringing it up because he feels humiliated because he knows that he's falling apart. He's melting. We're watching him melt. He's literally melting in front of our eyes. It's like when they drop the water on the Wicked Witch of the West and she's, I'm melting, but only he's melting and he's sending troops to Chicago and Portland. Somehow he's not melted enough that he can't stop himself from doing all these destructive things, but he is melting before our eyes.
And that's not good for our nation. We could we'll all disagree
No,
with
it's
Donald
not.
Trump, all of us, but you need a president that's competent because it's really
I
dangerous.
agree.
It can be easy to manipulate into doing things even worse than he's doing, and it's really bad. So, doctor, so if people want to follow you, what do you recommend? Is it social media? Is it the Shrinking Trump podcast? Where do you want them to go?
I actually have to announce that my co-host has gotten scared and nervous about being sued or attacked by the Trump administration. And as I like to say, I've always been a risk taker. I've known Harry for 50 years. I've gotten in trouble so many times that he's had to pull me out of trouble.
Wow.
He on the other hand has held one job and gotten tenure and been very effective. So he's a person of more normal temperament. So when it got to a certain level of danger, he said, John, I think they're going to sue us. I think we're going to get in trouble. I said, Harry, of course we are. I've been telling you this for months. Anyways, well, I don't want that. So we actually shot our last show last week. I was really overwhelmed. I really was overwhelmed by the pouring out of emotion in the live chats and in the recorded comments. A lot of people really felt a tremendous sadness. They'd become really bonded to us. They sort of said, you're our unpaid therapists. We come to you every week, to get a sane perspective on the insanity that's going on, and your humor helps us to be able to tolerate it. So it was very, very sad and very, very hard for us to stop the show, especially because also Harry and I really enjoy it. But the sad thing is the circumstances that brought Harry to the point where he felt it was too dangerous to continue. It was after Kimmel had been fired and Kirk was shot, and they were declaring war on all the hate speech, and it just seemed clear that they were coming after us. And we'd had Joe Walsh on the show, Joe Walsh, of course, and I actually replayed the interview on the last show because he said, "You guys are on the list. I mean, you don't think you're not on the list, do you?" And then he said, "But don't worry, there's plenty of people ahead of you on the list before they get to you." Well, when they fired Kimmel, I said, "I think they've run through the A-list."
So that's interesting. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope that you'll continue to do your work. It's much needed, and we'll have you on the show more often. Then this would be great.
Then you should. I'm a journeyman podcaster now, Dean. So I'm available.
All right. Thanks, Doc. Nice seeing you, Dr.